Hello everybody, my name is Kara, and today I'm here with my August reading plans. So I've been having really good reading months for the last few months, and I want to keep that momentum going, and I honestly think one of the reasons I've been doing so well, or that I'm so pleased with how much I'm reading, is that I'm doing a lot of readathons. So for August, I of course will be doubling up on multiple readathons again, but the one you guys have probably heard most about is that the NEWTs Magical Readathon will be happening again, and as with all of the readathons I talk about, I will put all the information in the description box. And I'm going to be going for the Alchemist career track, which is for a couple of reasons. One is I was having a really hard time deciding on a career anyway, and so I thought might as well go for the one with the most challenges because I am a true Ravenclaw and an overachiever. And another reason is kind of a silly one, but it'll be the last month of our FemmeFanTale Read-along. We'll be finishing up with the last book, and I thought, like, what better way to, I don't know, honor or channel that series than to go for the alchemy career track. Like, I think Artemis would be really proud. Actually, he probably wouldn't. He'd be really jealous. But anyway, that is my somewhat ridiculous reasoning, but we're gonna go with it. So because there are 17 prompts that you have to complete in order to reach the Alchemist career track, I'm not gonna go through every single book that I plan on reading. I'm just gonna focus on a few that I am reasonably confident I'm going to be reading because they fit for multiple prompts, and I've discovered I like leaving a little bit of wiggle room for myself, and for some reason once I commit to reading a book in a challenge video, I just get stubborn and I don't want to read it. So I'm going to be talking about a few of the ones that I am reasonably sure I'm going to read. Other than that, I'm just going to figure it out as I go along. And the other readathons I'm going to be participating in is the FemmeFanTale Readathon, the POC-A-Thon, and the Questathon, I think it's called, like the Percy Jackson themed one. And again, all the info in the description box. So the first prompt to become an alchemist is to get an A in Ancient Runes, and that is to read a book recommended by a friend. And I will be reading The 12 Dancing Princesses, as told by Mariana Meyer and illustrated by KY Craft. And this is a picture book. I thought I'd give myself a couple of really short ones to kind of help me out with my overambitious TBR goals. But my friend Giselle from Giselle Bradley, she really loves KY Craft's illustrations, and she basically, I think she has like a general recommendation for basically anything that she has illustrated. And I like the 12 Dancing Princesses fairy tale. I really like retellings of it, so I'm excited to read this one, and this also doubles for a few challenges, as all of the books I talk about here will be doing. For the FemmeFanTale Readathon, that is to read a book under 150 pages. And the Questathon prompt is Pit Stop, so a kind of short or relaxing book, like one to kind of chill with a little bit before you get into the really heavy books. To get an E in Ancient Runes, you have to read a book that is written in past tense, and I'll be reading March, Book 1. This is Volume 1 of a graphic novel series by John Lewis, Andrew Aiden, and Nate Powell. And this also counts for the POC-A-Thon prompt of a graphic novel, and I'm also using this for the Questathon prompt that is, I think, First Test, I think that's what it's called, and that is to read a book outside of your comfort zone. Because believe it or not, graphic novels are kind of out of my comfort zone. I've read a few more in the last few months than I have been doing, but it's still a format that I'm sort of figuring out, kind of like getting used to reading, and for some reason I actually, like, I know a lot of people keep graphic novels for like quick reads during readathons and stuff, which totally makes sense, but I generally don't, because I find that it actually takes me longer to read a graphic novel than it would a book of the same length. So I guess I'm like somewhat intimidated by the format, even though that sounds kind of ridiculous because like a lot of it is pictures. But for some reason it just takes me longer to follow a story that is told partly through a visual format that's not in words. That was like a needlessly convoluted explanation, but anyway, I'll be reading this one and I'm excited to get to it. I've had this on a couple of TBRs and I just haven't gotten around to it, but I've heard wonderful things about it. Then skipping all the way down to astronomy, and the second prompt for that one is to read a book that has night in the title or the series name. I'll be reading Tom's Midnight Garden by Philippa Pierce. This is a sort of classic children's fantasy story, I think, and I don't know much about it. I think it's about a boy who discovers a magical garden and maybe goes through it, something like that. I really, like I said, don't know that much about it. So besides astronomy, this is going to count for the FemmeFanTale prompt to read a book published before 2000, and this one is actually published long before 2000, 1958. And then to get an A in herbology, you either have to read an audiobook or read a book with a green cover, if audiobooks aren't really for you. And I will be doing the second option because I've talked about before how audiobooks and me just do not get along. Like, I cannot retain information like that. So the book that I have chosen for this one is The Last Guardian. This is the 8th and final book in the Artemis Fowl series by Owen Colfer. I'm really sad it's coming to an end, but obviously there is green on the cover. We will of course be having our live show as part of the FemmeFanTale Read-along, and this book is definitely the one I have reread the least number of times. I'm pretty sure I've only read this book twice, once right when it came out and then once later when I was doing like a full series reread. And this also counts for the Questathon prompt of Final Battle, which is to read the last book in a series. The next prompt for herbology is to read a book between 350 and 390 pages, and I'm sorry I'm reading so many of these off my phone, but I have like a spreadsheet of like all of the doubled up challenges I'm doing, so there are quite a few times I need to actually look at my notes. And for this one I'm going to be reading When the Sea Turned to Silver by Grace Lin. This is sort of a companion book in her folklore, her Chinese inspired folklore stories stories, and this is the only one I've heard that there's like a specific order you need to read it in. I've heard that this one you should read last, or that you should at least read it after Starry River of the Sky, I think, which is the first one I read from this author. And again, I don't know too much about the story of this one. I just know that I have really been enjoying Grace Lynn's folklore-inspired stories, and the way that she kind of connects fairy tales or folklore to her characters' own stories. I have just really been enjoying that, and once again, I have to show off the gorgeous illustrations that she does. I just think those are stunning. And for the FemmeFanTale Readathon, this will be counting as reading a middle grade book and reading a book by a BAME author, which stands for Black, Asian, or Minority Ethnic. And from what I can tell from like the research I've done, that's kind of the UK equivalent of POC or person of color. So that's what I'm going to be using this one for. The last herbology prompt is to read a book that has a flower on the cover, and I will be reading Amal Unbound by Aisha Saeed. I mentioned recently that I actually won this in a giveaway from SK Ali, who wrote one of my favorite books of the year, so that was really nice. But I am so excited to get to this one. I believe it's a story somewhat inspired by Malala Yousafzai and her work for the women's education movement, which is really exciting to me. And I believe it's about a main character who has to flee her village and try to go after what she wants, and I believe that is again involved with girls' education. So I think this is going to be wonderful. And I'm also counting this for the Questathon prompt of Point of No Return, which is also a Phantom of the Opera reference, which I love. And that is to read a book that handles a serious or heavy topic, I think, like kind of a more serious book, and this one definitely sounds serious. There's a corrupt landlord involved, and not to mention the fact that I believe Amal is going to be facing a lot of challenges when she's trying to get her education. Then skipping down to the second prompt for potions, where you're supposed to read a book that has a cover in your house color, and I'm a Ravenclaw, and so that would be blue. And I will be reading Fierce Fairy Tales, Poems and Stories to Stir Your Soul by Nikita Gill. This is a poetry collection that I think is reasonably well known. I haven't read anything by Nikita Gill before, but I have really been excited about it. I know that Nikita Gill is an Indian Sikh poet, and I believe she's now living in the UK, and I've just heard really, really wonderful things about her poetry from a lot of people. Most recently, my friend Huck from Badger Reads, she specifically mentioned this one to me, and she thought I would really enjoy it because it's like inspired by fairy tales and everything, and I have been really getting into poetry more recently, and I'm excited to read this. And the POC-A-Thon prompts this counts for is the nonfiction or poetry one. This is of course a poetry collection, and also to read a book by an author from a different continent than yours, and she lives in Europe, so definitely a different continent for me because I live in the US. And this also counts for the Questathon prompt of prophecy, which is to read a book that has, I think, some element of verse in it, and because this is poetry, the whole thing is verse, I think. Or poems and stories, actually, so maybe some of it is like prose or prose poems. The first transfiguration prompt is to read a book that has LGBTQIAP+ rep, and this is another book that I've had on several different reading plans or TBRs, and I just haven't gotten around to for no good reason, and that is The Bird King by G. Willow Wilson. One of the main characters is gay, and this is an own voices Muslim fantasy that I don't, again, like know very much about. I'm pretty sure the main characters have to flee their homeland after some bad people get wind of some special powers that one of the characters has, and I think this is like a historical fantasy that is partly inspired by the Spanish Inquisition, so I'm sure this is going to be a really heavy book in some places, but I have heard really interesting things about this one. And then for the FemmeFanTale prompts, this will be for the queer book and the adult book. And then for the POC-A-Thon, I'm counting this for the intersectional person of color character, because I believe it's Hassan, who is a person of color and who is also queer. The next transfiguration prompt is to read a book that is not the first in a series, and for that one I have Soul of the Sword by Julie Kagawa. This is the second book in the Shadow of the Fox series, and I really loved the first book, and I just have not gotten around to reading this one. I mentioned in my mid-year book freakout tag that this is a book that it's a new release, and I was so highly anticipating it. I think I even pre-ordered it or ordered it like right when it came out, and I just have not read it for no good reason. And then for the FemmeFanTale Readathon prompt, this also counts for the sequel challenge, and also for the reading a book that is set in a country not your own. And because this takes place in a fantasy Japan, that's what I'm counting this for. And finally, the last book I'm going to talk about that I am reasonably sure I'm going to be reading in the month of August is for the last transfiguration prompt, and that is to read a book over 500 pages. And for that one, I will be reading The Crimson Crown by Cinda Williams Chima. This is, I think, 600 pages or almost 600 pages. Yeah, it's like 595 or something. This is the last book in the Seven Realms series, and I have been putting this book off for a while because it's a very intense series, but I have really been enjoying it. I'm not going to go into the summary because obviously this is the last book in a series, but I have really loved the character development and the world building, and I'm also counting this for the FemmeFanTale challenge of multiple points of view. Okay, everybody, so that is kind of a taste of what I'm going to be reading in August. Again, lots of different readathons because that's just how I roll, you know. I'm not going to apologize for it. I'm really excited about all of these books. Let me know what you guys are planning to read in August if you're participating in any of these readathons. I'm excited to kind of try out this experiment of like planning some of my TBR and then like keeping some of it open to mood reading. So I'm excited to see how that goes, if I'm more likely to actually stick to a TBR if I do that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!